Aga nüüd me tuleme siis USA kogemusest üle ookeani tagasi vanasse maailma traditsioonidega Suurbritanniasse. Ja ma arvan, kõigile teile on kõige tuntum Briti persoon Bond, James Bond. Täna mul ei ole teile pakkuda agent 007, aga täna on pakkuda meile üks teine agent, BIM-i agent, nimega Philp, David Philp. The floor is yours.
Tere homicus. I've learned 2 words of Estonian already. I've also found that you have a lovely liqueur called Old Estonian as well, so I'm delighted to be here today in Estonia. I'm David Philp. I'm part of the UK BIM task group. Essentially, it's the United Kingdom government working together with industry and academia. So what's the day about? Well, for us, it's an opportunity to tell our story in terms of the UK government as a public sector client, in terms of how we're adopting BIM, why we're doing it, where we see the value, and the lessons we've learned from our first early adopter projects. But essentially, our talk today is going to be about collaborative digital working. So we've already heard the term collaboration, and that's a key word for us. It's about people. It's about bringing people together and using the digital technologies as an enabler to support it. So thank you very much for our invitation to be here today, and we hope you enjoy our story. What we are seeing in terms of the UK is we're going through a time of change. Our industry is changing probably faster than any time we can ever remember. What we are seeing is construction as an industry. It's probably the last bastion of analog economies. So what we are seeing now is a shift in terms of construction sector moving to a digital economy. And BIM's a big part of that. We start to think more and more about how we procure in a digital manner. So in terms of UK government, BIM is very much part of a procurement process. So we're starting to think about how we use data to make smart decisions to underpin smart procurement. So very much thought of as a procurement process. So for us, real speed of change, our landscape is changing, and BIM is very much there to support that journey. The reality is we probably don't like the term BIM, but we're kind of stuck with it. And actually, who cares what it means? It's more, what can we get from it? What outcomes can we actually achieve for use of collaborative digital working? What we are seeing, and we travel a lot, we see lots of countries that we're starting to see, if you like, a new revolution. People starting to use their data a lot better. Our biggest project at the moment in terms of the UK is called Crossrail. It's around about 18 billion euros, new tunnelling system. That project will be built at least 3 times, at least twice in the model, simulated, optimized, and then built flawlessly on site. So very much thinking of BIM in terms of better productivity and how we start to remove waste from the process. Now, this is certainly not unique to the UK. We're starting to see this as now very much as a global phenomenon. How do we start to take waste out of what we do? So very much BIM in the context of build better before built. So again, build it in the model, coordinate it, take the waste out, and then build it once flawlessly on site. So taking the waste out of the process, big part of what we're doing. What we're also starting to witness is very much growth in terms of data in the built environment. We heard about the engineer's model, the architect's model, but very much more already, it's about how we start to bring all these models together and start to think more and more about relational data sets. How do you tie it into your national weather in terms of forecasting? This makes smart environmental, social data with crime. So think more and more about how we start to bring data sets together. So it's not just about the single domain model, such as an architect or an engineer, but going beyond that. So what we're seeing is already your own data is not enough. But at the same time, what's happening, as you can see on the right-hand side, this data revolution is changing jobs. Already in the UK, we're seeing new jobs appearing, the BIM manager, the data manager, but people who are now thinking more and more about how we use, how we coordinate, and get better outcomes from our data set. So we've got to start thinking 10 years from now, what is our job profile going to look like? And a big part of what we're doing in the moment in the UK is starting to think about future gazing, how we put the educational building blocks in to support data management in our built environment. So what BIM's doing is very much starting to reshape our academic courses in terms of what that looks like. Starting to infuse BIM within it. But probably what we've got is very much an economic message. BIM is very much part of our economic agenda. And what you can see there is we can no longer support our low productivity growth. In the UK, we think we've got an industry to be proud of. In fact, a question for you as an audience, what is the gross value add of construction in Estonia to your overall economy? What percentage does it equal? Come on, have a guess. I'll start off. Is it more or less than 10%? Less. Okay, less. More or less than 5? Yeah, probably the 5%. In the UK, it's 6.7% gross value of the economy. It's probably one of the biggest anywhere in the world. It equates to just about 100 billion, if you like, in terms of euros to our economy every year. Now, if government doesn't do an intervention, try to get better productivity, that's going to fall away. So it's very much part of us, an economic message, becoming much more productive in terms of what we're doing. So BIM, very much part of making sure we can be more productive, better productivity, to work on a global stage. So we're starting to think more and more BIM, better productivity for the UK. And again, this is very much a global effort. We just simply can't afford to go on as we are at the moment. What we are seeing, again, worldwide, we're just back from New Zealand, Australia, China. Everyone's on a journey in terms of better productivity. We always hear 20% improvement by 2020. And what BIM's doing, and I think one of the things that BIM does very well, it comes an enabler. What we're seeing is much, much more thought. We heard it this morning in terms of lean construction, design for manufacture and assembly. It's helping that, pushing that agenda a lot more. We're starting to see China starting to think more and more about the kit of parts. You start to think about BIM, you start to create these kits or these objects that you can then start to produce in a factory, you optimize it, and then again, you can build it flawlessly on the site. These are breaking paradigms. You start to think, in the UK, that's a job that would maybe take 2 years. It's now getting built in maybe 15 days. So hugely changing the way we do things. And BIM is very much there as an enabler. And that's probably one of the biggest things we're seeing. It's not BIM in isolation, but how we bring BIM, lean, design for manufacture and assembly together to help enable that. The reality is, if we can't do it, we know there are many others out there that are more than capable. So again, huge economic message, but not BIM in isolation. It is about BIM and lean, BIM, and lots of other workflows coming together. So we said it's actually a truly global conversation. We're here today in Estonia talking about BIM. There'll be conversations going across in China, Russia, wherever. Everybody's on this journey in terms of change. And one of the biggest things up there is procurement. Procurement through computer-readable data. And that's one of the things in the UK we're trying to get from BIM, is consistent data outcomes that are tested and verified. And one of the things we find, just because we work in a digital environment, doesn't mean it's right. These lovely 3D models that we produce, the data that come out of them, it's not necessarily correct. So we've got to put in ways of testing and validating what we do, but getting, if you like, computer-readable data consistently is a big part of our journey. Once we do that, and what we're seeing is it will be a truly global playing field. About buying a book from Amazon, you probably don't care from where about in the world it comes from. You've got a reference code, you work in that digital economy, and construction will soon be there as well. In the UK, well, we want to be very much at the vanguard of that journey. We know in terms of economic development, there's probably at least 40 trillion of US dollars out there of investment in terms of infrastructure by 2030. So we know we've got to lead at this in terms of being, if you like, the most productive to actually make sure we do it. Well, how are we going to do it? That's one of our ministers in the UK. It's through a whole sector approach. So the UK government helping create that pool and try and get industry work consistently in the same way in terms of BIM adoption, but very much want to be at the forefront of this global race. And that's probably one of the key things. It is very much a global race, be it the work John's doing in America, to the work that's going on here, to the work in Russia and China, and indeed the work that's going on in Estonia as well. Well, why is UK government actually interested in BIM? Well, again, back to economics. We are having to save 20% in the cost of design, and procurement of our assets. Now, that's a fundamental step change. You can't go to your engineers or your suppliers and say, give me 20% off. We've got to do things completely different, radically. So this is very much disrupting processes, new ways of working, but we are trying to save 20% in capital expenditure. At the same time, one of the key messages that John talked about was operational life cycle. We're starting to think more and more about how we get better asset outcomes, assets that can work harder and longer for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So we're starting to think beyond delivery, very much what term we call, if like, operational life cycle, big part of what we're doing as well. So making our assets perform better and cost less. So more for less, but performing better as well. At the same time, we're using BIM to give us better carbon outputs as well. So starting to think more and more about sustainability, how we use BIM, predictive analysis, all these energy analysis tools to give the clients better outcomes, especially in terms of in-use carbon and embedded carbon as well. So a big part of what we're actually trying to do. In the UK, back in 2011, we put a government construction strategy together. So not a BIM strategy, but a government construction strategy with a series of initiatives, including this one called Building Information Modelling. Now that set out that government, as a client, wanted BIM in terms of 3D models. We wanted all your 3D files for the projects, technology agnostic. So government was not interested in terms of what software platforms are used. But in addition to the graphical models, we also wanted all the data that sits behind the model. So all the asset information digitally on all projects by 2016. And there was an interesting question in terms of scalability. So for us, there's no minimum project value. It's any project value. So we see the whole value proposition, no matter what the size of project. So it be a residential project, a big roads project, we think there's a huge value proposition in terms of BIM. So our project scale, we've got projects now over 50 million, right down to 200,000. So we see that scalability in terms of value proposition. Not just new build, but refurbishment projects, vertical assets, and infrastructure as well. So a huge amount. So all projects, any value by 2016. So very much a whole sector approach in the UK to ensuring we get consistent building information modelling. The other thing we're trying to do as well is try and create the intelligent client. And we see BIM has been making sure that clients can consistently ask for BIM. We fix very quickly in terms of the brief. So through BIM, we start to get a stable brief. Clients becoming very good at asking for their information. And it's also about trying to work with the supply chain as well. One of the things we've introduced alongside BIM is new forms of procurement that all encourage early collaborative working. So not thinking about BIM in isolation, but more and more ways to encourage collaborative working and the right behaviours from the supply chain as well. As we mentioned, we're thinking more and more about how we encourage design off-site in terms of design for manufacturing assembly. And we're thinking about better alignment of design, construct, and operate. So we're thinking more and more about an entire life cycle approach to the construction environment, which is very much key for us as well. But we started off the project with a simple hypothesis. And the simple hypothesis, back to the last 4 words, through the use of open, shareable asset information, so all the data that surrounds BIM, as a client, we can make much more well-informed decisions in terms of cost, value for money, and carbon. So a very simple assertion. We can use all the model data to make smart, earlier decision-making, and very much BIM was there to support that as a client. And when we talk about these decisions, this is a behavioural change. In the UK, we think very much about capital expenditure, the cost of building an asset, the cost of designing and building it, yet we don't think too much in terms of the operational cost. Often it's 2 separate pots of money. So we're now hearing more the term TOTEX, total expenditure, thinking more and more about the life cycle of an asset. And BIM is very much there to let clients make smarter whole life cycle decisions. So when we start building all the information into objects, into the models, we're putting more and more life cycle information there as well. So it's starting to create a behavioural change. Now, this slide reinforces one of the slides that John had in terms of how we traditionally look at the operational life cycle. It starts up there in terms of the cost of design. The cost of design over the life of an asset is actually very, very small. The cost of building it is a bit bigger. So let's say one's 100, the other one's 10. The real big costs start to come in terms of business costs, the cost of running it and maintaining it, but actually the big one that we often forget about is the cost of business outcomes. Did this asset give me a better outcome as a customer? Yet we still think, and we're always trying to squeeze down the cost of design and construct. So as John said, one of the things we want to do through BIM is actually turn that arrow roundabout. So we're starting to think more and more about better business outcomes through early collaborative decision making. Now that's actually quite hard because most clients don't buy assets very often. So there's a reliance on the professional teams to help them understand the data they need. So one of the big things about BIM is actually it needs to be fundamentally good in terms of the procurement processes that sit around about it. But a big part of what we're trying to do in the UK is to think more and more about not just delivery life cycle, but operational life cycle as well. So we're simulating more and more business outcomes in terms of looking at occupancy levels, people flows that support a business process. So it's very much key to what we're trying to do as well. But actually, if anything, BIM is a change program. It's about behavioral change. And I was so glad to hear this morning, it's not just about the digital technologies. This is very much about people and process. The technologies are there to underpin it. So it's a culture of doing things differently, and that's probably the hard part, trying to break a heuristic bias of, well, we've kind of always done it this way. Why break the habit of a lifetime? At the other time, we need to do thinking more and more about collaboration, doing things better, starting to assemble the right teams. Now, does anybody start to see where BIM is within that picture? Go on, have a guess. Can you see it? It's orchestra. It's probably right the way through it. We've got the smart client that's brought together the entire team. They've brought together the facilities manager. They've brought together the designer. They've got the whole team in the one room that can collaborate. We've got these tools. In our case, these are digital tool sets. But probably the most important part is the simple fact we have a musical score that everybody understands. In the world of BIM in the UK, we call that a common data environment. So people understand all the process. They know when the woodwind section should come in. They know when the brass comes in. But this is very much key for us. A smart client that can bring the right team together, that entire team to start making smart decisions. So it's very much about collaboration. And that's probably the key thing. We need to bring together a whole orchestra of players in BIM, not just lonely BIM where it's an architect or an engineer with a model. So what does BIM mean in terms of the UK? Well, actually, we're halfway through a 4-year program. And what has came for us is a better way of working, a smarter way of thinking. And as John mentioned, start to think with the end in mind, a start-to-start process. An asset continues a life cycle, very much 360 degrees. But actually what we want to see is value-creating collaboration, bringing all the people round about the campfire to make real decisions. So start to think more about an integrated engineering process, almost coming the 21st century campfire. Everybody comes around it, they discuss the problems, and they make smart decisions. And this is more what we want to see, if you like. The client, the design team, the contractor, round about the model, in real time, making smart decisions using the model data, both your 3D model and that non-graphical data that's so important to the client as well. So what's BIM? Well, for us, BIM, the building, if you like, we think it is very much a verb. It's a doing word. It's the act of building an information model that's helping us create a consistent collaborative industry with clear, open communication. Now, collaboration, communication, very much key for us in terms of the BIM program. We've got our information, but that information in our world is high-quality information. It's been procured, and it's been tested. And again, back to John's assertion, it supports business outcomes. Don't generate information without any purpose. It should always be purpose-driven information. So right amount of information at the right time is very clear. And the word, unfortunately, modeling, well, we think of it more, it's been said already, modeling and management. It's starting to think more and more about increasing efficiency, smarter and high quality information, but very much managing a process. In the UK, we've got a level of maturity. We've got 3 levels of definition. If you like, level 0, we've probably spent 20 years doing it. It was that move, if you like, in terms of unmanaged CAD, typically 2-dimensional, backed up with paper drawings or what we called electronic ink. We then made a huge step change, if you like, to level 1. Start to think about CAD, but starting to think we put our first, if you like, standard round about it. Now that standard was about collaboration. Start to think how we collaborate, how we start to share information very much in a structured management. So start to think about commercial data management. Now level 2 is what the UK government is asking for by 2016. So start to think more about object-orientated modeling, so managed 3D environment with non-graphical data set, but also starting to think about other data sets as well, be it commercial and facilities management. So we're starting to think about more data sets as well. And beyond that, we're starting to go on a journey. So from collaboration level 2 to start to think about integration level 3. Now, this is a journey for us, and this year we're just starting to scope it and look at the benefits, if any, to our client. So the big key for us, we're on a journey for us. It's going to take, if you like, you can see there that green part, 4 years to go from, if you like, the world of 3D CAD to level 2 BIM, that collaborative, and that's a huge step change. It's actually probably, I think, one of the most ambitious and fastest programs. On the basis, the move to CAD and maybe 3D took us around about 20 years. So UK, 4 years to make a whole change to our industry. But what you can see, it's a series of domain models. So it's not a single model. It's an architectural model, a structural model, a civil model that's brought together, or the term we use is federated. We bring this data together to make smart decisions at various stages in the project lifecycle. And we know that's probably the game changer beyond the red line, level 3 BIM or integration. And that means having to rip up a lot of the contracts and start to think about the world of integrated project delivery and operation. And that's going to be a real game changer in terms of industry. So in the UK, minimum standard of level 2 BIM by 2016. Now this is essentially what level 2 is. So you can see the series of domain models, the construction model, which is often time and cost, our architectural model in terms of geometry, spaces and areas, our structural team, putting elements in that maybe got some analysis, and our services model. So a series of models brought together in a shared common data environment to make smart decisions. So that's what we're trying to achieve consistently in the UK by 2016. And again, an example of how we can federate models. And of course, low-hanging fruit, coordination. But actually what we're starting to see is through having that coordinated process, we start to get a better, more collaborative environment between contractor, designer, and client. So these processes are helping us get better collaboration, but better behaviors, and better behaviors mean better outcomes for all. Now, in the UK, our processes are underpinned by standards. And this is probably our most important one. It's called how we manage our common data environment. The first thing is it builds upon good design management and good procurement within the world of analog. So it actually starts back in the analog world. And actually what we find is most BIM problems aren't BIM problems. It's because people don't do design management very well. We heard about the points of origin. Well, that's probably not, it's been with us for years, the world of CAD. So our big part starts off, get the design management right, get the procurement right before you start to think about BIM. So this, if you like, this is our standard, the UK standard. It's called PAS 1192 Part 2. It's free, so you can download it. I'll give you the address, a bit like John gave you some homework. I shall do the same. Huge downloads every week, interestingly, from China and from Russia. Now, the biggest user of level 2 BIM at this moment in time, or the biggest level 2 project, is actually in St. Petersburg. They're using it, and of the fact that it's got transparency. They use the data transactions to start to look in terms of business planning. So they're starting to use it in terms of prediction, in terms of supply chain analysis, and they use it to answer questions for them as a client. So very much starting to think about BIM in the context of a common data environment. The main, if you like, the backbone of it is we have tools, digital tool sets that are there, and again, you'll see them out And there's many different tools out there. They've got different levels of interoperability. They can be used to create, analyze, different tools. And it's up to, again, in terms of we as a government really don't care what's being used, but we start to think about our processes. We start to look at the tools and documents that John mentioned as well. The key thing for us are, we call it an employer's information requirement. So setting out the data needs and the execution plan in terms of how we go about starting to build those models and manage the data. So we've created in the UK a whole series, a bit like John has, in terms of the documents that support the client and the supply chain to give consistency throughout the BIM journey. So these are the things that we got. We call them our BIM artifacts, so the things that support level 2 BIM. So first off, we have processes that create a common data environment. So that's probably the key for us, having the process. We have a non-graphical data set that either comes from the model or it's sitting in another database. And we use, it's called COBE, the Construction, Operation, Building Information Exchange. So a consistent way of moving information in a common schema. Very important to us as a client. We've then got our two-dimensional drawings. We ask them as still PDFs. Contractually, unfortunately, we still need them. And we need them for our planning and regulatory process. We hope to get rid of that soon, but it's still needed at this moment in time. We've also got what we call a BIM commercial suite. So we're now starting to think of how we synchromesh BIM within the procurement route. So BIM is part of the procurement, it's part of the contract. So there's an obligation to supply digital information at different stages of the project. So very much part of that contract hierarchy as well. And the bit we love at the end, the 3D models, these beautiful pictures, but actually as a client, all these bits to the left are probably more important. If you're a client, there's an expectation that I'm going to get a coordinated design anyway. I want the other information that's going to help support my process. It's valuable in terms of a communication tool, but actually probably the most important part for the client is a non-graphical data set that will be used during that operational life cycle. So they're the key elements, but again, I won't go into this in any detail. It's underpinned by a common data environment, how we share information during that design process. Now this is essentially level 2 BIM in the UK. So if you're flying into Estonia at 32,000 feet, this is what you'd see in terms of level 2 BIM. Firstly, it's a 360-degree process. So it's an entire asset lifecycle process. It goes round a loop. It's like a racetrack. And we'll try and unpack it. Nice, simple slide. It starts up at the top with what we call plans of work. So different stages in the asset life cycle. Now, what we have supporting it is a series of what we call plain language questions. In the UK, Russia, China, we found out our clients understand plain language questions. Now, a plain language question might be, can I afford it? How much carbon's within there? Can you build it within my timescale? Have you optimized it? So the client articulates BIM in the UK for a series of what we call plain language questions. Now, all these questions have a purpose. So we make sure, as we said, and John said, everything is purpose-based. We then transact upon them for a series of COBE, or non-graphical data, and the 3D models as well. So each of these points has a series of needs in terms of plain language questions. Now you can see there at the end of these lozenges, the green and red footballs, we call these data transactions. So we query the model to take information out that supports the plain language questions. Time, cost, carbon, accommodation schedules. We can query the model to answer these questions. So that's a key part of our process. But it starts off with assessment and need. So we start off with our clients, starting to build what we call our EIRs, Employers Information Requirements. So setting out these plain language questions right at the very beginning. And a bit like John says, it starts at the top right. It starts very much with the end in need. Starting to think very much about operational data sets as well. So if you go onto our website, what you'll see, there's a series of plain language questions at different stages. So clients can pick questions. We can then tie that up to our data hierarchy in terms of what answers the question. Is it geometry? Is it analysis? So what actually answers that exam question? And we tie it all back to a piece of data set. So there's a piece of code supports that information. So each government job, client creates a series of plain language questions, and then we start to put it into the world of BIM as an overlay. Now that looks at three things. It looks at the technical side in terms of what tools, what formats are going to be used. We look in terms of managerial, in terms of roles and responsibilities. And we look at commercial as well, in terms of how that's going to be underpinned as part of that contract condition as well. So it's consistent in terms of what we do. A client being very good articulating data that's got a purpose, and it's backed up very much with a plan of how it can be achieved. So you can start to see there in terms of the hypothesis, the key decision points, which are these red diamonds. So right in terms of that project lifecycle, clients make decisions. They're backed up with a series of data exchanges, the green footballs. And what you can see is the concept that John talked about, level of detail or level of development. The amount of information in the model grows throughout the entire project lifecycle. It gets more mature, but what happens is when you hand over a project, it continues to grow. In-use data, you start to feed back in terms of post-occupancy evaluation. How's this room performing? Is it performing to the right temperature, the right environment? So what we've introduced in the UK is a series of feedback loops. So we mandated post-occupancy evaluation as well, so we learn from our assets. So every year we start to learn and feed back. So the next time we come to brief a job, we've got that in-use data, which is very much key to what we're doing. So we've now got a team on board. The client's articulated their need, and you can start to see these free swim lanes that we start to build up. So we collect and manage graphical data, our 3D models, the non-graphical data in terms of COBE, but there's lots of other things we link to it as well, manuals, test certificates that we're bringing together. But the key thing is we're doing a series of information exchanges to answer the questions. Is it affordable? Does it meet my technical standards? Does it meet my carbon targets? So we're constantly querying the model to make sure it meets the contractor's needs. And we're always working within a collaborative data environment. So we're checking all that information at each stage. So it's always been validated. So you can start to see there, the supply chain working in the common data environment. We transact the green football. We check it, but we then use the data. So we might put it into an operational system for planned preventative maintenance, or we might put it into a report. So the client might get a simple report that looks at cost, carbon, area, again validating their questions. But the key is we transact upon it, we check it, and we move it on. And it's underpinned, and probably one of the biggest challenges we've had is we get ensure we get consistent data. And COBE, if you like, is our schema for doing that. It's a formal schema, many ways of achieving it, but we can use that data at many different levels. Atomic level in terms of a space with objects within it we can query, or right up a strategic level in terms of government portfolios. But what we would say, we mentioned at the beginning, one of our biggest projects is Crossrail in the UK, big tunnelling job. What we're seeing, it's not just about graphical data. And you can see behind there, all the other systems we're now having to try and link into the world of BIM. So what we are seeing, it's not just about the 3D model where everyone lives to, but how we start to map all these elements together. So our 3D models, all our geospatial data, and how we link together all the document through other relational databases. So start to map things out is key to us. So not all the information lives within the graphical model, but the graphical model becomes a conduit to link other databases together. So that's very much key what we're doing as well. The other big part that we launched as of last night is how we manage the information in what we call the asset information model in the operational life cycle. So we're starting to think about portfolio management and planned preventative maintenance. As a client, we've got a huge use beyond delivery in terms of how we use the model. So a client having to think for 30, 50 years, how am I maintain a model is hugely key. But the big part is the feedback loop. We're always feeding back information through post-occupancy evaluation. So what does this look like? Well, we tested the hypothesis. This is our very first government department. Ministry of Justice, prisons, courthouses. And the first thing we've done, we got them together and looked at business process. And hopefully you can see up there, that's their entire asset lifecycle process. So a collaborative team, all their stakeholders brought together in one room. We plotted out their plan of work, their key stages, their business process, and hopefully you can see the red diamonds. Now, the red diamonds are where they put their key decision points that they had to make as a client. You can see them there. We then said to them, what questions do you have to answer at those key decision points? So as a client, they put cost, area, technical standards, and such plain language questions as, can a prisoner escape from this cell? So they came up with their own data strategy at these meetings, and you start to see the data transactions at those key points. Now, this was our very first project in the UK. New build prison. It was worth about 25 million euros, 180 prison cells. And you can see the model that we started to build as a client. Now, it was also about right amount of information at right time. So we modeled the toilets within the cells to a high level of detail. And we worked with the supply chain to make sure that they could be built in terms of lean, in terms of optimization, but also in terms of future facilities management. We reckon we managed to do, through a digital sandpit, save at least 20% in terms of the speed that we could build these toilets and how we could maintain them as well. We then thought about laser scanning. So as we're testing things, we're also laser scanning it as well, laser scanning the mock-ups and putting it back in the model as well. So very much thinking about lots of different digital workflows at the same time. Very much key to our program as well. We call it digital reality capture. This was our very first, if you like, transaction, our first decision point as a client. And the decision point was, does this meet my outline business case? So you can see there, some of the key things we're looking at is we're looking at adjacencies and massing. The geometrical model is very basic, because the client said, actually, to make these decisions, we don't need a lot of images. We just need simple massing diagrams. Now from there, the client was able to produce and validate a series of room data sheets that validated their question. It was also linked to a cost plan, so they could look at the cost. They could look in terms of, does it fit in my site? Does it answer these fundamental questions? The answer to that was yes. It then moved on. So you can start to see the geometrical model, it's starting to get a bit more detail. It's got more level of detail within it. We've now got some objects. We've got beds and we've got tables. However, there's not sufficient detail within there to say who supplies it. So that model goes out to the supply chain, went out to 5 contractors who swapped over the generic objects, the placeholders, for something from them, their own supply chain. It's got cost, it's got carbon, it's got program. From there, we were able to select a contractor in the terms of value, could they meet the plain language questions, and we could query their model. So that project is now about to finish in November this year. And it's always nice to hear the client story. Now, this is Emily Thomas, the governor of that prison. She was involved right the way through the design process. Emily's statement was, for the very first time, she was part of the design process. As a client, she could make smart design decisions that save money and will allow better outcomes. So back to our hypothesis for the use of BIM, can we get more for less? That prison is going to benchmark 20% improvement compared to any in terms of cost, so we're getting it 20% lower. But the key things, improved visibility in terms of the design process. She was part of that. She made better decisions. She also, and I think this is true of any BIM project, it reduced risk. So the risk contingency came right down. We'd coordinated everything, but she understood it as a client. It took the risk down. Improved efficiency. We mentioned that we managed to, through lean working with BIM, we managed to get much more productive. Another part, and this is the big, big part, as a client, we don't want better models, we want better outcomes. Now, Emily believes in terms of this building will perform probably better than any prison in the UK because she's been part of the process, part of the design process, and will get better outcomes. And we're now starting to think about capturing social outcomes from our assets as well. So it's a key part of what we're doing. As a task group, well, where have we got to now? From the learning from that one project, we've now got at least 20-odd government projects off the back of that are up and running. And as we head towards 2016, it will keep growing and growing. But I think one of the big successes we've had in the UK is what we call regional BIM hubs. So we've created these communities of practice right throughout the UK. We've now got at least 12 of them. The last one we had in Ireland last week, we got 400 people locally just to talk about BIM, tell their stories, share information, collaboration, and start to help them accelerate in their journeys as well. So it's not just about us as a client, but as a responsible client, starting to help the supply chain with their journey as well. So we think we've started not just to do, if you like, the needs of a client, but beyond and help engage the supply chain and help drive adoption in terms of there. We're also starting to think beyond 2016, beyond level 2. Now this is, we call it our industrial strategy in the UK. So start to think about construction 2025. And there's probably 4 key things within it I'd like to share. Lower costs, 33%. So we set out through BIM to save 20% through capital costs. We're probably well on with that journey, but we're now thinking of saving 33% over an entire project life cycle. We want to be more efficient in terms of sustainability, our carbon burden. We want to cut that by 50%. 2 important statistics, but actually the 2 big ones are on the right-hand side. We want to deliver our assets faster by 50% reduction. Well, we can knock a couple of weeks off the build period through design, simulation, but the big part we mentioned is through procurement. Digital procurement will cut down the overall cost of building, procuring an asset dramatically. So where we're starting to move towards, as we said, digital procurement. By 2025, we believe we will reach nanosecond procurement. Because we've got a kit of parts, a bit like Amazon, people will trade electronically. We can start to procure in an electronic manner, and that's a key part of where we're going. So level 2 BIM is pretty much a training ground. It's learning a supply chain, it's learning industry to transact upon data reliably, but once we move to the world of level 3 and integration, it's a complete game changer. We're also looking to get improvement in exports by 50%. So that means we're starting to come up with selling data, selling digital services. So we're starting to move, as we said, becoming a digital economy. And we're already seeing UK companies that are using level 2 BIM starting to win work abroad because of their know-how and their knowledge. So very much, again, back to an economic message. What we do know as well as we head towards 2025, the construction roles will be unrecognizable to us. Universities, colleges have to start thinking now to put the framework in place of what this looks like. We've got a group in the UK, which I chair. It's called BIM 2050. Young people from all professions start to look at how BIM is going to reshape careers, education, technologies, what that's going to look like. Start to think about future gazing. And what we do see already, there's a skills gap. We're starting to put people at university, preparing them for jobs that don't yet exist, maybe 2-3 years. The tools probably haven't been invented yet because we're learning all the time. So we've got a huge need to start future gazing and start to put these early building blocks in terms of now. In the UK, we have got an education and training framework for BIM that we're starting to see going through the universities to at least get a consistent standard. The technologies are changing all the time as well. We're starting to see industrialized 3D printing start to move out the universities, these new ways of working that underpin BIM. Start thinking more and more about the production model. So really what we're saying is, well, I think the future is going to be unlimited. It's start to think about how we use these digital technologies to get better outcomes. So back to right at the beginning, what does BIM mean? Well, who cares? It should always be thinking about better outcomes. What does it mean to you, for your lens, and how is it going to give you and your client better outcomes? And it should come back to 2 things. It should give you reduced risk, and it should add value. So other than that, really don't do BIM, and that should be very much key. So a bit like John said, I've got to cite you some challenges as well. Have a look at our website before you have a look at Penn State's. Sorry, John, but I'm a second. You'll see all our documents there. They're all free of charge to download. We have a weekly newsletter going out. There's also a lab space that's got test data, test tools, so you can go, you can play about, and give us your feedback as well, because we would love to hear from you. We think this is genuinely better together. So we'd love to thank you for inviting us across to Tallinn. It's been a real pleasure. And any questions?
Tahtsid küsida, jah?
Yeah, tahtsin küsida ikka. You talked about the new strategies that you have for 2020?
2025.
2025. And overall, you are planning to reduce the costs and carbon footprint and all these things by using BIM technology as one aspect out of many others, yes?
Yes.
Have you think about how you're going to actually measure this? Because in the science, this has been a huge problem for many years.
That's a real good question. We're starting to put in quite a lot of measures at the moment. One of the big things we mentioned is post-occupancy evaluation. So each of our assets, we want to measure not just the capital metrics, and they're a nice, easy one for us to measure. Did it cost us less to build? Did we reduce down risk? So we've got a series of metrics already in terms of design and construct. But what we're now starting to put in place is our evaluation process and operational life cycle. Now, this looks at things such as energy. It also starts to look at more things in terms of social data as well. In terms of hospital, are we starting to get better patient recovery times? So we're starting to create a whole series of data capture. But interestingly, where we want to get to is sensor-rich assets. We want to be very much starting to get feedback in real time. Already, we're starting to link BIM to building management systems. So using sensors, we're starting to look more 24/7 how assets are performing in terms of energy, but we're starting to go beyond that now. And we've got to almost be feeding back, not to just facilities management people, but to boardroom staff as well, to make smart investment decisions using real-time data is where we want to get to by 2025. But we're starting to put these early metrics in at this moment in time. But post-occupancy evaluation is our big one.
Yeah, that's very good. I got you. I probably got you. I think what you were saying was that it's not about investment at the beginning, but it's about the life cycle of your assets and its value for the client or the end user. Another question. You have developed a national BIM program, basically, and you probably have got some funding from the government as well, I guess. And I know it's was it £4 billion or something like that?
4 million. It's a bit more discreet. 4 million, but we've got support from industry.
Okay, that's actually where I wanted to get. Do you have some kind of because now the government says that we expect from our suppliers to deliver these in different stages, yes, by asking those simple questions and giving out the standards and etc. Is government somehow also supporting the industry to actually develop to the stage that then actually provide those services to the government, or they have to do it by themselves and they have to invest their money by themselves?
As a government client, we are technology agnostic, so we never tell to an industry, you must use a certain tool. And actually what we're finding is rather than designers, that often a lot of the software technology out there is pretty much free. The design viewing tools, the design reviewing tools, indeed even some of the clash detection tools are actually free. So the inconvenient truth is for the designer, there is initially going to be an investment cost. But in the UK, the smart design teams have already made that early adoption cost. So in the UK, as a government client, what we're doing is investing in terms of process and understanding. So we have free training for our hubs in terms of helping the supply chain understand the processes, the protocols that sit round about it, and show them where the case studies are. We didn't want to be too prescriptive because we felt it would take a lot of the innovation out of the process as well. So very much, here's where we want to get to in terms of A to B. This is the information we need. But largely how you get to there in terms of your technology toolkit is very much up to the supply chain to decide. Indeed.
So thank you. Nii, kes nüüd hakkab kätega vehkima? Kellel on vaja mikrofoni küsimuse jaoks? Nii, siin ole. Jaa, palun räägi aga mikrofoni, siis tuleb eesti keeles.
Tahaks küsida selle efektiivsuse koha pealt. Küsimus puudutab efektiivsust. 30% madalamad kulud, mille arvelt, kas vähem töökohti tulevikus sektoris või kes on see maksja, kes maksab kinni see 33%. Võrdluseks, et täna põllumajanduses töötab 5% võrreldes eelnevate aegadega, et mis on teie prognoos, kui palju töökohti väheneb seoses selle julge programmiga? Aitäh!
The decrease in cost is going to come right the way across the entire life cycle. Sir? All right, sir. Okay, the cost is going to come right the way through the entire asset cycle. In terms of the brief, so the brief is going to be more refined. It's going to take some waste out. We'll take waste out of the design process in terms of risk, contingency. We'll also start to see productivity, but the big saving is going to be in smarter operation in terms of energy savings. But you asked the question in terms of jobs. It is going to reshape our industry. There will be new roles created, but we've also looked to see what happens if we don't do anything. If we don't intervene, there'll be even more job losses. So we are going on a journey towards new jobs, a new landscape in terms of what we're doing. Design for manufacturing, lean, is going to reshape things anyway, but BIM's there to help create and shape new jobs. But what we are starting to do is try and relate it back for our case studies in terms of what does a typical 33% saving look like. A good example is in the UK, a project that's BIM'd, if you like, probably has no builder work into connection with services. We don't drill holes, we don't have as much fire stopping. So actually we're taking some of the objects actually out of the process through smart, efficient modeling. We reduce the risk. We're reducing the risk at the cost of prelims. So we typically save about 10% in terms of capital expenditure and 20% in terms of better energy.
So, thanks. Nüüd veel küsimusi. Enn.
Ma kasutan ka võimalust esitada küsimuse eesti keeles. Sa viitasid BIM-valdkonnas väga tõsisele arengule nii Hiinas kui ka loode Venemaal. Et mis on, meil on mõningal meie kooli mehel on kogemus Hiinast töötamisest ja minul ja minu eakaaslastel pikaajaline kogemus ka töötamiseks Vene ehitajatega koos. Et kust sa näed seal seda kohutavat arengut?
What we're seeing in Russia and China compared to the UK is they have less baggage. We have lots of traditions in the UK that people hold on dearly. We don't like to change. The speed of change can be very hard in terms of institutes, especially architects, engineers, they hold on dearly. What we're seeing in Russia and China is there's less baggage. There's more willing to change. They understand the economic message. But what we're also seeing is they love the idea of transactions. They love the fact that there's more transparency in terms of what they're doing. And they're trading, if you like, more and more now in terms of data. It's a big, big part of what they're doing. So we are generally seeing Russia and China starting to use the level 2 process that we showed here today to make better data transactions. And one of the key things we hear with them as well is data foresight, using the data to look longer term as well, not just at an individual project level, but more portfolio, more strategic as well. So as John says, not just at project level, but going beyond that, thinking more in terms of data at enterprise level and making smart decisions as a client as well. So big scalability in terms of what they're doing.
So, thank you. Ja ma arvan, et praegu on juba päris mitu asja küsitud ja ma pean ikka vaatama mujale ka pilguga. So, thank you, John. Not John, you are David. and you can just sit down and for sure you will stay here over the lunch as well, and anybody who will have questions can turn up and ask the question.